Imagine being born into a world where no matter how hard you worked, no matter how many hours you spent under the burning sun, no matter how many sleepless nights you endured, your life would end exactly where it began. Not because you lacked courage, not because you lacked intelligence, but simply because of the family you were born into. That was the reality for nearly every human being alive in the year 1800. And today, we are going to take you on a journey through 3 centuries of struggle, ambition, genius, and greed to show you exactly how the rules of wealth changed, who broke them, who got left behind, and what it all means for you sitting wherever you are right now. Before we go any further, drop in the comments right now, where are you watching this from and what time is it there? It genuinely amazes us every time we see people from completely different corners of the world, different time zones, different lives, all gathered in one place to learn the same story together. And if you are finding this valuable, subscribe right now and hit the bell, because this 5-part series is going to be one of the most important things you watch this year. Now let us go back, all the way back to a world you would barely recognize. The year is 1800. The world has a population of roughly 1 billion people. There are no cars, no electricity, no telegraphs, no railways connecting cities, no stock markets in the form we understand today, and absolutely no concept of a self-made millionaire the way we romanticize it now. The vast majority of human beings alive at this time are farmers. They wake before sunrise, they work until their bodies give out, and they sleep in homes made of mud, stone, or wood with no heating beyond a fire, and no running water beyond a nearby stream. They are not lazy, they are not unintelligent, they are simply trapped inside a system that was designed, very deliberately, to keep them exactly where they were. To understand how people got rich in the 1800s, you first have to understand one word: land. Land was everything. Land was power, land was food, land was status, land was survival. If you owned land, you owned the lives of every person who needed to work that land to feed their family. And in 1800, almost all land in the Western world was owned by a tiny group of people called the aristocracy. These were families, the dukes, the earls, the lords, the counts, who had inherited their estates from their fathers, who inherited from their fathers, going back sometimes 500 years or more. They had not earned this land through brilliance or hard work. In most cases, an ancestor had simply been loyal to a king during a war, and the king had rewarded that loyalty with a piece of territory. And from that moment forward, wealth flowed automatically through blood. Think about what that actually meant in practice. A lord in England in the year 1800 might own 20,000 acres of farmland. On that land lived hundreds of farming families, each of them paying rent to the lord simply for the right to exist on his property and grow food. The lord did not farm. The lord did not work. The lord sat in his estate, attended social events, hunted on weekends, and collected money every single month from people who had no other choice but to pay him, generation after generation. The wealth compounded not through effort, but through ownership. And this was completely legal, completely accepted, and completely invisible to question, because the church, the government, and the cultural narrative of the time all reinforced the same idea that God had placed these people in positions of power, and it was not your place to challenge that. Now here is where it gets even more interesting. Because the aristocracy was not the only way to accumulate wealth in the 1800s, there was a second path, far more dangerous, far more exciting, and far more available to men of lower birth. That path was trade, specifically international trade. And to understand it, you have to understand how truly extraordinary the world of commerce was in the early 19th century. Ships were crossing oceans carrying goods that people in one part of the world had never seen and would pay almost anything to obtain. Spices from Southeast Asia that could make food taste like something from another world. Cotton from the American South, grown by enslaved hands, that clothed the bodies of Europeans. Silk from China, tea from India, opium, which the British East India Company was shipping into China in quantities that would eventually trigger 2 wars, because the profit was so incomprehensible that governments were willing to go to war to protect it. The merchant traders who navigated this world were a different breed entirely from the landed aristocracy. They were risk takers, they were deal makers, they were men who understood that if they could buy something cheaply in one part of the world and sell it expensively in another, the profit margin could be life-changing. But the risks were equally enormous. Ships sank, pirates raided, diseases wiped out entire crews before they reached port. Foreign governments changed policies overnight. You could invest everything you had in a single voyage and receive news 6 months later that the ship had gone down in a storm somewhere in the Indian Ocean, taking your entire fortune with it. This was not investing in the comfortable modern sense. This was gambling with your life savings in a world with no insurance and no safety net. And yet some men succeeded spectacularly. The merchant families of Britain, France, Holland, and America, who got the timing right, who built the right relationships, who survived long enough to compound their profits. These men accumulated fortunes that rivaled the old aristocracy. And what did they do with that money? They bought land. Because even the self-made merchant of the 1800s understood that in this world, true security only came from ownership of the earth itself. But there is a part of this story that is absolutely impossible to tell honestly without confronting the darkest chapter of 1800s wealth creation, because woven through almost every major fortune of this era, whether aristocratic, merchant, or industrial, was the institution of slavery. The cotton that fed the textile mills of England and created enormous industrial fortunes was picked by enslaved people in America under conditions of unimaginable brutality. The sugar that sweetened the tea of every middle class English family came from Caribbean plantations, worked by enslaved Africans who had been ripped from their homes and treated as property. The banking houses of London and New York financed the slave trade and collected interest on loans made to plantation owners. When slavery was finally abolished in the British Empire in 1833, the British government paid compensation worth roughly £17 billion in today's money, not to the enslaved people who had been freed, but to the slave owners, for the loss of their property. These families used that compensation money to invest in the new industrial economy, and some of those family fortunes are still intact today. This is not comfortable history, but it is true history. And any serious examination of how people got rich in the 1800s cannot look away from it. Now let us talk about the event that began to shake everything, the Industrial Revolution. Because starting in Britain in the late 1700s and accelerating dramatically through the early and mid-1800s, something was happening that had never happened before in the history of human civilization. Machines were beginning to do the work of human hands. The steam engine, the spinning jenny, the power loom. These inventions were not just clever gadgets, they were economic earthquakes. A single factory with machines and a handful of workers could produce more cloth in a day than an entire village of skilled handweavers could produce in a month. And whoever owned that factory, whoever had the capital to build it, fill it with machines, and hire workers, was sitting on something that printed money. The factory owners of the early Industrial Revolution were a new kind of rich person entirely. They were not aristocrats. Many of them came from modest backgrounds, craftsmen, merchants, engineers, men who had a technical understanding of what machines could do and the business sense to exploit it. Men like Richard Arkwright, who was born the youngest of 13 children to a barber and a laundress, and died one of the wealthiest men in England, knighted by the king, having built a network of textile factories that employed thousands of people. His story was so unusual for its time that people talked about it like a myth. Because the idea that a man born with nothing could end his life wealthy enough to purchase a castle, and Arkwright literally did purchase a castle, was almost incomprehensible to the society around him. But here is the crucial thing to understand about the early industrial factory owners. They did not make their workers rich. They made themselves rich by paying their workers as little as humanly possible. The working conditions inside these early factories were genuinely horrific by any measure. Children as young as 5 and 6 years old worked 12 to 14-hour shifts in textile mills, their small fingers useful for tasks adult hands could not perform. The factory floors were deafeningly loud, choked with cotton dust that destroyed lungs, lit by dangerous open flames that caused fires regularly. Workers who were injured had no compensation. Workers who were too slow were fired instantly, because there were always desperate families outside the gates willing to take their place. The wealth being generated inside those factory walls was extraordinary, and almost none of it reached the people whose labor was actually generating it. This is perhaps the most important economic reality of the entire 1800s. Wealth was accumulating at the top with a speed and concentration that the world had genuinely never seen before. The gap between the richest and poorest people in a city like Manchester or London or New York in 1850 was so enormous it is almost difficult to hold in your mind. A factory owner might earn in a single day what one of his workers would earn in an entire lifetime, and the system was structured to keep it that way, through laws that criminalized workers organizing for better conditions. through government policies that protected property rights above all else, and through a cultural narrative that told poor people their poverty was a reflection of their moral character rather than their economic circumstances. And yet, even in this brutal, unequal, seemingly fixed world, there were cracks beginning to appear. The Industrial Revolution was creating something it had not intended to create. It was creating the conditions for a different kind of ambition. It was proving that the old rules, that wealth required land, that status required birth, that poverty was permanent, were not actually laws of nature. They were just arrangements, and arrangements, unlike nature, could be changed. By the end of the 1800s, that change was already beginning. Railways were crossing continents. Telegraphs were connecting cities at the speed of electricity. Oil had been discovered in Pennsylvania, and the entire world was beginning to realize that a new kind of fuel was about to replace everything that came before it. New industries were being born. New fortunes were waiting to be made. And in the century that was coming, the brutal, extraordinary, world-changing 20th century, the rules of wealth would be rewritten in ways that nobody standing in 1800 could have possibly imagined. If you watched part 1, you already know that the 1800s were a world built on land, blood, and inherited power. The aristocracy sat at the top of a system so deeply fixed that a man born poor could work every single day of his life and die in the same condition he arrived in. But as the 19th century closed and the 20th century opened, something underneath the surface of civilization was beginning to crack, not slowly, not quietly, but with the force of oil erupting 50 meters into the air from the ground in Beaumont, Texas on the 10th of January 1901. That moment, that single gushing fountain of black crude that rained for 9 days before anyone could stop it, announced to the world that a new era had begun. The era of the self-made man. The era where hunger and vision and ruthless intelligence could build fortunes larger than anything the old aristocracy had ever dreamed of. And the men who understood what was happening before everyone else became the wealthiest human beings who had ever lived. The first of those men was John Davison Rockefeller, born in 1839 in upstate New York to a con-man father who sold fake cancer, cures from a traveling wagon, and a deeply religious mother who raised her children on discipline and very little else. Rockefeller grew up understanding scarcity in a personal and intimate way. From childhood, he kept meticulous records of every penny he earned and every penny he spent in a small personal ledger he called Ledger A. He was not flashy. He was not loud. He was patient, methodical, and possessed of a strategic intelligence so far ahead of his competitors that they frequently did not realize they were losing until it was already over. When oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859 and thousands of men rushed to drill for it in a frenzy of speculation and chaos, Rockefeller watched and waited. He studied the boom and bust cycles, the wild price swings, the men who struck rich one season and went bankrupt the next, and he identified something almost nobody else had seen. The real money was not in finding the oil. The real money was in refining it and moving it. Whoever controlled the refineries and the pipelines controlled everything that came after them, and Rockefeller set about controlling them with a coldness and precision that was almost mechanical. By 1870, he had founded Standard Oil. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of all oil refining in the United States. He achieved this through strategies that were brilliant, ruthless, and in many cases what we would today consider deeply illegal. He negotiated secret deals with railways to receive lower shipping rates than any competitor could access. When competitors refused to sell to him, he undercut their prices so aggressively. They bled money until they had no choice but to sell or be destroyed. When they sold, he absorbed their operations and made them more efficient. By the time the United States Supreme Court finally broke Standard Oil apart in 1911, ruling it an illegal monopoly, Rockefeller owned shares in all 34 successor companies. When those shares rose following the breakup, he became even richer than before. At his peak wealth, adjusted for today's economy, Rockefeller was worth somewhere between $300 and $400 billion. He remains by almost every measure the wealthiest private individual in modern history. But oil was only one engine of early 20th century wealth. Running parallel to it was steel. And the man who dominated steel the way Rockefeller dominated oil was a small, energetic Scottish immigrant named Andrew Carnegie, who arrived in America at the age of 13 with virtually nothing. His family could not afford the passage and had to borrow the money. As a child in Pittsburgh, he worked as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory for $1.20 a week. He then worked as a telegraph messenger and then a telegraph operator, learning and observing at every step. He eventually entered the steel industry at the exact moment when American infrastructure was exploding outward. Railways needed steel rails, cities needed steel beams for their new tall buildings, bridges needed steel cables. Carnegie understood that whoever could produce steel more cheaply and in greater quantities than anyone else would own the construction of modern America. He threw himself into mastering the technology, eliminating waste, driving down costs, and controlling everything from his iron ore mines to his finished product. By 1900, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than the entire nation of Britain. In 1901, he sold his company to banker J.P. Morgan for $480 million, equivalent to roughly $15 billion today. Morgan reportedly told him afterward that he was now the richest man in the world. Carnegie spent the rest of his life giving almost all of it away, funding over 2,000 public libraries, operating on the belief that a man who dies rich dies disgraced. And then there was Henry Ford. Ford did not discover a natural resource or dominate an existing industry. He did something more profound. He changed the relationship between production and consumption in a way that created the modern economy as we know it. Before Ford, automobiles existed, but they were handmade, expensive, and owned only by the wealthy. Ford asked a question that seems obvious in hindsight, but was genuinely revolutionary at the time. What if you could make a car so cheaply that the workers who built it could afford to buy one? In 1908, he introduced the Model T, and in 1913 he introduced the moving assembly line at his Highland Park plant in Michigan. Instead of workers moving to the car as it was being built, the car moved to the workers, each performing one specific task as the chassis traveled down the line. Production time for a single Model T fell from over 12 hours to under 2 hours. The cost fell dramatically, and by the early 1920s, Ford was producing over 1 million cars a year. But Ford did something else that his fellow industrialists initially thought was insane. In 1914, he announced that Ford Motor Company would pay its workers $5 a day, roughly double the standard industrial wage. His competitors predicted it would destroy the industry. What actually happened was that Ford's workers, now earning real money, could afford to buy the very cars they were building. A consumer economy was born, and that single idea that workers were not just a cost to minimize but also customers whose purchasing power kept the whole machine running was one of the most important economic insights of the entire 20th century. By the middle of the century, the industrial landscape had transformed almost beyond recognition. The old aristocracy still existed, but its dominance had faded dramatically. These new industrial titans had proven something that permanently altered the human imagination. But the industrial era had its darkness, just as the land era had. Factory conditions in the early 20th century were brutal. Children worked 12-hour shifts in mills and mines. Workers who organized for better pay were sometimes met with hired security forces and violence. And then in 1929, the American stock market collapsed, so catastrophically it triggered a decade of poverty and desperation across the entire Western world. Men who had done everything right found themselves standing in breadlines. Farmers lost their land. Banks collapsed. What stabilized it was something nobody in 1800 could have predicted: government intervention on a massive scale. The New Deal programs of President Franklin Roosevelt poured public money into infrastructure, regulated the banks, and built the beginnings of a social safety net. Then the Second World War pulled every major industrial nation into the largest economic mobilization in history. When the war ended in 1945 and soldiers came home, America entered a period of expansion so extraordinary it is sometimes called the golden age of capitalism. Government loans helped veterans buy homes. Universities filled with the first generation of working-class young men accessing higher education. The middle class exploded in size. Consumer culture transformed daily life for millions of ordinary people whose parents had been poor. For a brief, remarkable moment in history, the gap between rich and poor actually narrowed. Wealth was more widely shared than it had ever been before, but underneath this prosperity, something new was quietly stirring. In university computer laboratories and government research facilities, strange machines were being built that could process information and communicate with each other across vast distances. Most people had no idea these machines existed. A handful of people did, and in the decades that followed, those people would build fortunes that made even Rockefeller look modest by comparison. They would not need oil wells or steel factories or railway networks. They would need something far simpler and far more powerful. They would need code. And that story, if you watched part 2, you left off in a world that had just discovered what ambition combined with industry could produce. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, men who had built empires from almost nothing using oil, steel, and the assembly line. But as the 1950s settled into the 1960s and the 1960s pushed into the 1970s, the industrial age was quietly approaching its ceiling. The great fortunes had already been made in oil and steel and automobiles. The railway networks had already been built. The factories were already running, and a generation of young people who had grown up watching their fathers clock in and clock out of those same factories every day of their lives were beginning to ask a different question. Not, what can I build with my hands, but what can I build with my mind? The answer to that question would produce the most concentrated explosion of individual wealth in the entire history of human civilization. And it would begin not in a boardroom or a bank or an oil field. It would begin in a garage. To understand how we got there, you have to go back to a device most people have never thought about seriously. The transistor, invented at Bell Laboratories in 1947 by a team of physicists. The transistor was a tiny semiconductor that could switch electrical signals on and off, performing the basic binary logic that all computing depends on. Before the transistor, computers used vacuum tubes that were large, fragile, expensive, and generated enormous heat. The transistor was smaller, faster, cheaper, and far more reliable. And as engineers learned to make transistors smaller, packing more of them onto a single chip of silicon, computing power began to grow at a rate that seemed almost supernatural. In 1965, an engineer named Gordon Moore observed that the number of transistors on a chip was doubling roughly every 2 years, while the cost was falling by half. This became known as Moore's Law. And if you followed that curve to its logical end, the implications were staggering. The computer that filled an entire room in 1955 and cost millions of dollars would by 1985 fit on a desktop and cost a few thousand. Most people in positions of power in the 1960s completely failed to see what this meant. The people who did see it gathered in a stretch of suburban California, south of San Francisco, that would come to be known as Silicon Valley. And they changed everything. The idea that ordinary people might want to own their own personal computers was considered almost absurd by the established technology companies of the early 1970s. IBM made its money selling enormous mainframe computers to large organizations. The engineers who ran these companies simply could not imagine a world where a person sitting in their living room would want their own computing device. They were wrong in a way that would cost them everything. In 1975, a small company called MITS sold a computer kit through a mail-order advertisement in Popular Electronics magazine, and the response was so overwhelming it crashed their mail system. People wanted personal computers desperately. The question was, who would build the software to make them useful? A 19-year-old Harvard student named Bill Gates read about it and immediately called MITS, claiming he and his partner Paul Allen had already written a programming language for it. They had not written a single line. He was bluffing entirely, buying time. He and Allen then worked around the clock for weeks to actually build what he had promised, and when they delivered it, it worked. Gates dropped out of Harvard, moved to be near MITS, and began building a company called Microsoft. From the very beginning, Gates demonstrated something that separated him from almost every other brilliant engineer of his generation. He understood not just the technology but the business underneath it. He understood that in personal computing, software was going to matter more than hardware. Hardware could be manufactured by anyone with the right factory, but software, the code that told the hardware what to do, could be owned, licensed, and controlled. And if your software became the standard that everyone used, then every computer sold anywhere in the world would generate revenue for you without you manufacturing a single physical object. This insight reached its defining moment in 1980 when IBM came to Microsoft, looking for an operating system for its new personal computer. Gates did not have one. But rather than admit this, he purchased a small operating system from a Seattle programmer for $50,000, refined it, renamed it MS-DOS, and licensed it to IBM with one crucial condition that IBM, in its corporate arrogance, did not fully appreciate. Microsoft retained the right to license the same operating system to other manufacturers. IBM thought it was buying control of the personal computer market. What it was actually doing was handing Bill Gates the keys to the entire industry. When IBM-compatible computers from dozens of other manufacturers flooded the market through the 1980s, every single one ran Microsoft software. Gates collected a licensing fee on every machine sold. It was structurally almost identical to what Rockefeller had done with oil refineries a century earlier, controlled the essential layer that everyone must pass through and collect a toll on everything that moves through it. By 1987, Bill Gates was a billionaire at 31 years old. By the mid-1990s, he was the richest person on Earth. But Gates was not alone, because while Microsoft was conquering the software world from Seattle, something different was happening in a garage in Los Altos, California, that would produce a different kind of genius and a different kind of fortune. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded Apple Computer in 1976, where Gates was primarily a businessman who understood technology. Jobs was primarily a visionary who understood human desire. Wozniak built the machines. Jobs understood what people would feel when they used them. He understood that technology was not just a functional tool, but an emotional experience. That if you could make technology feel beautiful, intuitive, and deeply personal, people would not just buy it. They would love it with an intensity that went far beyond normal consumer behavior. Jobs was famously obsessive about design, in a way his engineers sometimes found maddening. Agonizing over the curve of a corner, the weight of a device in the hand, the sound it made when it turned on. But this obsession produced something that pure technical engineering rarely does. It produced products that people fell in love with. Jobs was pushed out of Apple in 1985 in a boardroom conflict, spent over a decade building other ventures, and returned in 1997 when the company was weeks from bankruptcy. What followed was one of the most remarkable corporate resurrections in business history. The iMac, the iPod, the iTunes Store, the iPhone, the iPad, each one a product that did not just compete in an existing market, but created an entirely new one. The iPhone, introduced in 2007, was not simply a better phone. It was a pocket-sized computer connected to the internet that also happened to make calls, arriving at the exact moment when mobile connectivity was fast enough to make such a device genuinely transformative. Within a decade, the smartphone had changed virtually every aspect of human life, and Apple, which had been nearly dead in 1997, became in 2011 the most valuable company on Earth. The extraordinary thing about the wealth being created in Silicon Valley through the 1980s and 1990s was not just its scale but its speed. Rockefeller had taken decades, Carnegie had spent his entire working life, but the technology entrepreneurs of the late 20th century were becoming billionaires in years, sometimes in months, and they were doing it without factories, without oil wells, without armies of physical laborers. They were doing it with code, sequences of ones and zeros that could be copied infinitely at virtually zero cost and distributed to every corner of the earth through telephone lines, and then through something that was about to change absolutely everything: the internet. In 1994, a Princeton graduate named Jeff Bezos was working a comfortable job at a hedge fund in New York when he read a statistic that stopped him completely. Internet usage was growing at 2,300% per year. He pulled over on the side of a highway, made a list of products that could be sold online, and drove to Seattle to build one of the most consequential companies in human history. His wife drove while he wrote the business plan in the passenger seat. He started selling books from his garage. His parents invested their life savings of roughly $250,000 in their son's idea. His father later admitted he did not know what the internet was when he made the investment. He was investing in his son. Within a decade, that investment was worth billions, and the company Bezos built in that garage would go on to reshape retail, cloud computing, and logistics on a global scale that no single company had achieved since Standard Oil. By the early 2000s, it was undeniable that the information age had rewritten the rules of wealth more completely than any previous era. But what came next was something even the Silicon Valley pioneers had not fully anticipated. A new generation was about to discover that you did not need to build software or sell products online to become extraordinarily wealthy in the digital world. You simply needed people's attention. Have you ever found yourself scrolling endlessly through social media, watching one recommended video after another, only to look up and realize hours have just vanished? Where did all that time go? Well, it wasn't just lost. It was captured, packaged, and sold. Welcome to the attention economy, the invisible marketplace where your focus is the most valuable currency. Let's break it down. In the past, economies were built on tangible goods, things like crops, steel, and oil. Then came the information age, where data became the new gold. But in a world overflowing with information, what becomes truly scarce and therefore valuable? Your attention. Every app on your phone, every website you visit, every streaming service you subscribe to is in a fierce, zero-sum battle for a slice of your day. When you give your attention to one thing, you're inherently not giving it to something else. And tech companies understand this better than anyone. So, how does this invisible economy actually work? It's a simple, yet powerful, three-step model. First, companies create a platform that offers something you want, whether it's connecting with friends, entertainment, or information. Think Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, or Netflix. Second, they work tirelessly to keep you on that platform for as long as humanly possible. This is where the magic, or perhaps the dark magic, happens. They employ armies of psychologists, data scientists, and engineers to design features that are psychologically compelling, even addictive. Infinite scroll, autoplay, push notifications, like buttons, streaks. These aren't just convenient features. They are meticulously crafted tools designed to hook your brain. They trigger dopamine releases, creating a cycle of seeking and reward that keeps you coming back for more. The third and final step is monetization. Once these platforms have captured your sustained attention, they sell it to the highest bidder, the advertisers. Every second you spend watching, scrolling, and clicking generates data about your interests, your habits, your desires, and your fears. This data is then used to serve you hyper-targeted ads. That's why, after searching for a new pair of running shoes, you suddenly see ads for those exact shoes everywhere you go online. The platform isn't just selling ad space, it's selling a guaranteed audience. It's selling you. This business model has been phenomenally successful. In fact, it powers some of the largest and most profitable companies in human history. The saying, "If you're not paying for the product, you are the product," has never been more accurate. Your attention is the raw material that fuels this multi-trillion-dollar industry. But what's the cost? Is it really just a few annoying ads? The consequences run much deeper and are starting to become alarmingly clear. On a personal level, the constant battle for our attention is eroding our ability to focus. Deep work, creative thinking, and even meaningful conversations require sustained, uninterrupted concentration. When our brains are trained to expect constant novelty and quick dopamine hits, focusing on a single, complex task becomes incredibly difficult. We become masters of multitasking, which is really just task switching, and our cognitive performance plummets. This fragmentation of attention can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and a feeling of being perpetually overwhelmed and busy, yet unproductive. Beyond our personal focus, the attention economy is reshaping our society. To maximize engagement, algorithms have learned that outrage, controversy, and extremism are incredibly effective. Content that elicits strong emotional reactions, positive or negative, gets more clicks, more shares, and more watch time. As a result, platforms often amplify the most divisive and polarizing voices, pushing people into ideological echo chambers. Nuance is lost, and civil discourse is replaced with tribal shouting matches. The algorithms don't care about truth or societal well-being. They care about what keeps your eyes glued to the screen. This has profound implications for our democracy, our social cohesion, and our shared sense of reality. Furthermore, the constant comparison and curated perfection we see on social media can be detrimental to our mental health. We're endlessly exposed to the highlight reels of other people's lives, which can fuel feelings of inadequacy, envy, and depression. We're performing for an audience, curating our own digital identities, and chasing validation in the form of likes and followers. It's a game that's designed to be unwinnable, leaving many of us feeling more disconnected than ever, despite being constantly connected. So, are we doomed to be passive puppets in this digital spectacle? Absolutely not. The first step to reclaiming your attention is awareness. Understanding that your focus is a valuable resource and that powerful forces are competing for it is incredibly empowering. It allows you to shift from being a passive consumer to an active, conscious user of technology. How do we do that? We can start by taking back control of our digital environment. Turn off all non-essential notifications. Do you really need your phone to buzz every time someone likes your photo? Schedule specific times to check social media and email, rather than letting them interrupt you throughout the day. This is about being intentional. Instead of asking, "What do I want to see now?" ask, "What is the best use of my attention right now?" Another powerful strategy is to curate your information diet, just as you would your food diet. Unfollow accounts that make you feel angry, anxious, or inadequate. Follow creators who inspire, educate, and add genuine value to your life. Replace low-quality, passive consumption like mindless scrolling with high-quality engagement. Instead of watching random short videos, maybe use that time to watch a full-length documentary on a topic you're passionate about. Read a chapter of a book, or listen to an in-depth podcast. It's also crucial to create sacred tech-free spaces and times in your life. Make the dinner table a phone-free zone. Leave your phone in another room when you go to bed to improve your sleep. Practice digital Sabbaths a day, or even just a few hours, where you completely disconnect from screens and reconnect with the physical world, with your loved ones, and with yourself. Go for a walk in nature, pick up an old hobby, or simply sit in silence and allow your mind to wander. It's in these moments of quiet and boredom that our brains can rest, process information, and generate our most creative ideas. This isn't about becoming a Luddite and smashing your smartphone. This technology offers incredible benefits and has connected the world in amazing ways. It says about shifting the relationship from one where the technology controls you to one where you control the technology. It's about treating your attention with the respect it deserves, your most finite and precious resource. It is the currency with which you purchase your life. Think about it. Your entire experience of being alive is the sum total of what you pay attention to. If you pay attention to fear and outrage, your life will be filled with fear and outrage. If you pay attention to beauty, learning, and meaningful connections, your life will be rich with those things. The attention economy wants to make that choice for you, guiding your focus towards what is most profitable for them. But the ultimate choice is, and always will be, yours. By becoming more mindful of where we invest our focus, we not only improve our own well-being, productivity, and happiness, but we also send a powerful message to the industry. We vote with our clicks, our time, and our attention. As more people demand healthier, more humane technology, the market will have to adapt. The future of technology and, in many ways, the future of our society depends on us waking up and consciously deciding what is truly worthy of our attention. So the next time you pick up your phone, pause for a second and ask yourself, what am I about to trade a piece of my life for? Is it worth it? Reclaiming your attention is reclaiming your life. Thanks so much for watching. If this video gave you something to think about, please give it a like and subscribe for more content on how we can navigate our modern world more consciously. Let me know in the comments what you do to protect your attention. See you in the next one. You have traveled a long way to get here. You started in 1800, in a world where a poor man becoming wealthy was so rare it felt closer to myth than reality. Where land was destiny and birth was fate, and the system was designed with such deliberate precision to keep people exactly where they were that questioning it felt almost like questioning gravity. Then you watched the industrial age crack that system open. You watched Rockefeller and Carnegie and Ford prove for the first time in human history that a man born with nothing could die richer than kings. Then you watched Silicon Valley rewrite those rules entirely. Gates and Jobs and Bezos showed the world that you did not need land or factories or oil wells. You needed code and vision and the courage to bet on something the rest of the world had not yet understood. And then in part 4, you watched something even more extraordinary happen. You watched ordinary individuals, people with cameras and internet connections and something genuine to say, build audiences and empires and fortunes that bypassed every traditional gatekeeper that had ever stood between a person and economic freedom. 3 centuries, 3 completely different worlds, 3 completely different sets of rules. And yet, when you lay all 3 eras side by side and look at them carefully, certain patterns emerge that repeat with such consistency across every generation that they begin to feel less like coincidence and more like law. The first pattern is this. Every great wave of wealth creation in history has been built on a resource that the previous generation did not recognize as a resource. In 1800, land was the resource and everyone could see it. But the men who got rich in the 1900s did not get rich from land. They got rich from oil, which had been sitting under the earth for millions of years, completely ignored because nobody had yet figured out what it was for. The men who got rich in the early 2000s did not get rich from oil. They got rich from software and information, which had always existed in human minds, but had never before been scalable, distributable, and ownable in the way that digital technology made possible. And the men and women who got rich in the 2010s did not get rich primarily from software. They got rich from attention, the focused time and emotional engagement of human beings, which had always been finite and valuable, but had never before been so precisely measurable, so efficiently packaged, and so aggressively competed for. Each generation looked at what the previous generation had built and assumed those were the rules. The truly wealthy looked at what the previous generation had missed and built something there instead. The second pattern is timing, and this is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth in this entire series, because it suggests that luck plays a larger role in wealth creation than most successful people are willing to admit publicly. Rockefeller entered the oil refining business at the exact moment when oil was becoming indispensable, but before any single player had established dominance. Gates entered personal computing software at the exact moment when hardware was becoming cheap enough for ordinary people to buy, but before anyone had established a software standard. Zuckerberg launched a social platform at the exact moment when smartphone adoption was about to make social media accessible everywhere and always. In each case, the person had genuine talent and genuine vision, but they also arrived at the right moment. Slightly earlier, and the infrastructure was not ready. Slightly later, and the space was already occupied. The men and women who had equal talent, but worse timing, built companies you have never heard of, because history does not remember the people who were right too soon or too late. It only remembers the people who were right at exactly the right moment. Understanding this does not diminish the achievements of the people who succeeded, but it should deeply humble anyone who attributes their success entirely to personal brilliance, and deeply encourage anyone who has not yet found their moment. Because moments come in every generation. The question is whether you are paying close enough attention to recognize yours when it arrives. The third pattern is the one that almost nobody talks about because it is the least comfortable and the most important. In every single era of wealth creation across these 3 centuries, the people who built the largest fortunes did so by identifying what ordinary people needed or wanted or could not resist, and then positioning themselves to collect a toll on the flow of that need. Rockefeller did not sell oil to consumers directly. He controlled the refineries and pipelines that every oil producer had to pass through to reach the consumer. Gates did not sell computers. He owned the operating system that every computer manufacturer had to license to make their hardware useful. Google and Facebook did not sell anything to their users. They owned the platforms that advertisers had to pay to reach those users. In every era, the wealthiest position is never at the point of production. It is at the point of control, at the choke point, at the layer of the system that everything else must pass through. Understanding where the choke points are in any emerging industry is worth more than any business school education ever given. So what does this mean for right now? What does it mean for you sitting wherever you are watching this? Because if these patterns are real, and 3 centuries of evidence suggests they are, then the question worth asking is not how did people get rich in the past? The question is, where are the choke points forming in the economy of the future? And there are several answers that are already visible to anyone willing to look forward rather than backward. Artificial intelligence is not simply a new technology. It is a new layer of infrastructure that is being built right now underneath virtually every industry that exists. The companies and individuals who position themselves at the control points of AI infrastructure, who own the models, the data, pipelines, the distribution platforms, the application layers that businesses cannot function without, are building the Standard Oils and the Cliffsofts of the next 50 years. Right now, today, while most people are still debating whether AI is real or just hype, the hype is irrelevant. The infrastructure is being built regardless. And whoever controls the infrastructure controls the toll. Biological technology is another. The ability to read, write, and edit genetic code is advancing at a pace that mirrors the early days of computing. The companies building the foundational tools of this industry, the platforms that researchers and pharmaceutical companies and agricultural businesses must use to do their work, are positioning themselves at choke points in an industry that will touch every living thing on Earth within the next century. Energy transition is another. The shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy is not a political opinion. It is an engineering project of incomprehensible scale that is already underway and will require decades and trillions of dollars of investment to complete. The companies controlling the critical minerals, the battery technology, the grid infrastructure, and the software managing the new energy networks are sitting at choke points in a transition that has no alternative and no off switch. But here is what is equally true and equally important. Not everyone who gets wealthy in the next 50 years will be a founder or an investor or a technologist. Because the fourth pattern that runs through all 3 centuries of this story is one of democratization. Every wave of wealth creation that begins with a small group of visionary founders eventually creates the conditions for a much larger group of ordinary people to build modest but genuine wealth by understanding the new rules earlier than the people around them. The Industrial Revolution created factory owners first, then it created a middle class. The Information Age created tech billionaires first. Then it created millions of people who built real wealth through real estate leverage, index fund investing, and the creator economy. The AI age will create its billionaires first, and then it will create new pathways for ordinary people that we cannot yet fully see, but that will seem obvious in hindsight 20 years from now. The pattern always holds. The question is always the same. Are you learning the new rules while everyone around you is still playing by the old ones? This is what 3 centuries of wealth creation actually teaches if you read it honestly. It is not a story about exceptional people who were fundamentally different from everyone else. It is a story about people who paid attention at the right moment, who saw a resource others had not yet recognized, who positioned themselves at the choke point before the traffic arrived, who had the courage to act on what they saw, even when everyone around them thought they were wrong. That capacity to see clearly, to act early, and to hold your position while the world catches up to what you already understood is not reserved for any particular era or any particular class or any particular kind of person. It has been available in every century. It is available right now. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you are willing to look. If this series changed how you see the history of wealth and the world we are living in right now, then do one thing before you close this video. Share it with one person who you think needs to see it. Not because we are asking for views, but because the ideas in this series are genuinely worth spreading. Subscribe if you have not already, because what we are building on this channel, deep, honest, cinematic explorations of how the world actually works, is only just beginning. The next series is already in progress, and if this one gave you something real, the next one will go even further. We will see you there.